Hi guys, unfortunately I'm back. I've been gone like 5 minutes and I'm already back to annoy you, I know, but it's okay because your saviour is in the form of Penny Griffiths Morgan. Hello.
It is coming live at you from Essex in South England.
And Penny's saved you lot from me because you've got Penny for the next hour. How lucky are you that you haven't got to listen to me? And especially for our American viewers, I know they're going to be really interested in more of the history about the UK. So
Cool.
I will go away and you can continue, my love, and take over.
You're going to be listening so you know when I'm finished so you can come back in. Yep. Awesome.
Yeah.
The plan comes together. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. And please, can I do the next hour in a black? No, I can't. That's a one-time offer at Christmas only. Aha. But thank you all for joining in. In case some of you don't know who I am, I'm Penny Griffiths Morgan, probably better known as the presenter, writer, everything to do with haunted histories, be it the Facebook page, be it the podcast, you name it. That's what I do. So thank you ever so much for joining me tonight. Now, I've got some slides I'm going to be talking through. It sounds really dull, doesn't it? I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation, but hopefully you will enjoy it. And please do, I know they've just put the link up there. Please do, if you haven't already, donate some money to this wonderful charity, Calm, which is what all of us tonight and tomorrow and Sunday are putting all this time and effort into promoting. There's an awful lot of people. Hi, Kelly. There's an awful lot of people who are suffering and really struggling at the moment all around the world, to be honest. So if we can do a bit to help and to give them something to enjoy, something to watch, and know that we are thinking of you. We are there. I know I personally have gone through it. So please do dig deep. I feel like Bob Geldof doing Live Aid or something when I do these sort of things. But what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight, and I am happy to answer questions, but what I will say is when I pull my PowerPoint slides up, I won't be able to see the questions. So if you can wait until after the presentation is finished to ask a question, and then I'll be able to answer it for you, as long as that makes sense. So let's get on with this. Right, let's do the slideshow. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can still hear me because I can't see you now. So the talk I'm going to be doing tonight is it's very similar to a talk that's actually on my YouTube channel, Haunted Histories, but with a bit of a tweak for you. And I do an awful lot of work on the Victorian era, and anyone who knows me or follows me, and there's probably some people sort of face palming right now and groaning, oh God, she's going to talk workhouses. I'm not, haha, but there's an awful lot else that sort of surrounds the whole Victorian poor concepts and what happened to them. So it's one of the other lines, if you like, and although there are times when I have been absolutely vilified for my analysis of some of this stuff, that's what it is. It's analysis. It's not necessarily an opinion over whether it's right, whether it's wrong. And one of the big things was how back in the Victorian era, and probably before in the Georgian era, late Georgian period as well, is how do we remove these people from this poor trap? How do we get them out of this cycle of poverty? Because that's what it was. It was a cycle of poverty. You know, you would have the grandparents, the great-grandparents, the parents, the children, then their children, and so on and so forth. They would all be in this poverty trap. How did they get them out of it? And education was seen to be the way. That if you can teach these people these children to read and write, you know, their parents were almost seen as being past that. You know, can't teach an old dog new tricks and all that kind of cliche. But they thought, well, if we can stop the poor relying on the system for poor relief and everything else, we are going to get them out of that trap. It's going to save us money in the long run because we won't be having to pay, I say, something called poor relief. Won't be having to pay for the workhouses and all that kind of thing. Now, you may wonder why my first slide is called Christmas Past. Well, even though we're not going to start in the Victorian era, I'm going to be just a little bit before that. As with all things to do with the Victorians and the poor, Charles Dickens has a little bit of a role in this. So I hope you don't mind my little way of organising all the different parts of this talk. Now, back in the day, it was very much geared towards the more affluent, richer people, how they got education. Many of them could afford to pay for education because education wasn't free. In fact, I'm going to talk about when education became free as to the talk. Now, before you worry and think I'm just going to be throwing dull facts and figures at you, I am going to go a bit more specific with some experiences and some personal experiences of an amazing location in the UK. But I want to give you the background to it. So, those richer people, those people with a bit of money, the sort of more the upper class, who didn't really have a middle class then. It was upper class and lower class, really. They could afford to pay for things like a governess. Now, any of you are familiar with the Bronte Sisters, their novels? Think of Jane Eyre, think of things like that. These would have been women who were single, probably sort of not really poor, not really rich, but needed an income. They would normally live with the family. They would be paid in those days around £25 a year, so not bad, not a bad income. I say there wasn't really a middle class. There wasn't classed as a middle class, but it was kind of in the middle of the two. Now, the girls would be taught maybe to read, possibly, but more likely to sew, to do sort of how to look after their husband, because at the end of that, it's all women were worth, wasn't it? And if anyone comments and saying it's all they're still worth, I will punch you through the computer. I have the power. Anyway, the boys would be taught at home. They would be taught all the basic sort of education skills before they went off to private schools like rugby and all of those kind of ones. It was the boys who got the education. Most girls could read and write, though. They could sign their own name. They could. They were allowed to, read the Bible. They were allowed to read poetry and stuff like that. But they weren't seen to be as important for them to have an education as it was the boys. What about the poor? Well, the most common method of education, and think about it, we still have these now, was the Sunday school. The Sunday school was really pioneered by a chap called Robert Raikes. I'm not going to talk about him too much because I'll be honest, I don't like him. I think he's not a very nice person. But as you can imagine, Sunday school, as they still are, was very religion-based. The school textbook was the Bible. Simple as that. And then once children had actually mastered and learnt to read the Bible, they would go on to the and I can never pronounce this word, the catechisms. So for anyone who doesn't know, basic Q&A about religion. And it was very, very harsh. There's a saying in the Bible, spare the rod, spoil the child. Well, they did not believe in sparing the rod. For example, children who lied would have their fingers burned. I mean, it was pretty, and Raikes actually advocated these sort of things. He advocated being what we would deem now as cruel. It was the norm, but they were very, it was very, very denominational. It was very, very, it's all about learning the Bible. The other type of school was something called a dame school. Now, these, in a way, were nothing more than a nanny service. Children would be dropped off to a woman, and it was a woman, hence dame, pay maybe a couple of pence a day to look after their children. And she would ostensibly teach them how to read and write. Although normally some of these schools were run by women who were, for want of a better term, basically alcoholics who couldn't think of anything else to do. And I'm not all of them. Some of them were actually quite useful, but anyone could set one up. You didn't have to have a qualification. You didn't have to have a experience. And a lot of these poor families were so desperate to be able to work, they would use them. They would use them. When you think that children were working from as young as 6, 7, 8 years old, and those families relied on that money that those children were bringing in. And it wasn't until 1878 that the Factories and Workshops Act forbid children under the age of 10 of working in the factories. In fact, there had been an act coming about 40 years beforehand that was specific for textile factories, textile mills, but that didn't cover all of the mills. And as probably a lot of you know, especially those of you who are based more in the north of the UK, you had cotton mills, you had wool mills. Well, they separated them all out. So you had the wool, you had the silk, you had the cotton. Some fitted into the textile side, some didn't. So it was very, very hard. And again, those children, their money was essential. So what happened? Well, I mentioned Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens did an awful lot of... He wasn't just an author. He did an awful lot of work on improving and making it clear to people who'd never seen a workhouse, who'd never seen a school for the poor, who'd never seen what a slum area was like. He wrote a lot of what they would call pamphlets talking about these. But he also agreed that a poor school was possibly worse for some of these children than no school at all. You know, if children weren't taught how to think, they were just taught to recite, say something, rote, you know, ROTE, wrote, and they had no sort of skills per se, they might as well have just not gone to one at all. He actually did go to a dame school for the first few years of his life and said it was awful. He said, he didn't learn that much at all until he was sent to, you know, what his biography says basically is a proper school. But one of the schools that he spent a lot of time at was one called Field Lane. It was Field Lane Ragged School in London. And that sort of brings me on to the fact that there were sort of, I suppose you could say, 3 different types of poor schools that were really set up. And if you want to learn about these, do go and check out my YouTube channel, because I do a presentation that talks about all 3. Now, the ragged schools, they were called ragged schools for that reason, because the kids who were coming in literally came in rags. And they were first established properly, if you like, in 1844, although back in 1798, the first one was sort of thought to have been started in London by a tailor, of all people, called Thomas Cranfield. Then you had the national schools. They were established officially in 1811. And then you had what we now know as the British and Foreign School Society, which was actually first established in 1808 and known as the Lancasterian system for the education of the poor. And that's the one that we're going to focus on. I was quite pleased when they changed the name, I must admit, from the Lancasterian, and I can't even pronounce it, the Lancasterian system for the education of the poor, when they changed it to the British and Foreign School in 1814, it makes it a lot easier. Or sometimes just known as the BFSS, the British and Foreign School Society. But what made it different? Why exactly should we care? Well, this rather portly looking gentleman is Joseph Lancaster. Now, Joseph was born to a non-affluent working family. I believe his father was a former soldier who, when he was invalided out, made sieves for a living. He's from London, but he discovered he had a love. This is Joseph. He had a love of education and working out ways to teach people, especially children. He actually set up a free school in his house, or his father's house, to be accurate, in 1798, and realized that although you couldn't guarantee a certain number of children turning up, because if their parents needed them to go out to work, that's what they were going to do. But he was trying to work out a way of how do we teach the maximum number of children at minimal cost. Now, this was something that became known as the Monitorial Method. I'll explain a bit more in a minute. Now, what he wouldn't have realised is that he was developing this at the same time as another educator who called it the Madras method, and this was Andrew Bell. Lancaster's, not sort of surprisingly, became known as the Lancasterian method, and Bell's was known as the Madras method because of where he developed it in Madras, simply put. Now, in essence, the principle of the two systems were the same, and these two were rivals for a very, very long time, it has to be said after this. But the principle was less teachers, less salaries, more affordable. As simple as that. And what Lancaster wanted to aim at, and if there's any teachers actually listening or watching this, if you haven't gone grey over the last month or so, or since lockdown started again, or trying to cope with everything, you will now. He aimed for there to be one teacher to 300 pupils. Now, and those were boys at that time. 300 boys with one grown-up looking after them. I kind of, having two sons myself, the thought of that times 100, no. But he developed he did develop it, and he would design these classrooms a bit like this sort of black and white picture here. Now, this is called a monitorial classroom, and as you can see here, it was basically like a giant sports hall, so high roofs so that there was lots of space and everything, big windows but not so low as in the children could look out of them, so lots of light coming in, lots of space, and you would have the children would be in rows. Now, the thing about Lancaster is he was very, very good at raising money. He was very, very good at, he would tour the country raising money for this type of school. He would approach pretty much anyone and ask them to donate for his schools. And as I said, he was doing this at the same time as Bell was developing his method. Now, Bell actually put his method into, he was a reverend, which may give you a clue as to what I'm going to say next. But Lancaster was a Quaker, so he still had a religion, but he felt this school should be non-denominational. He felt that religious education should not be what you focused on. He felt that you should focus on learning, whereas Bell was the opposite, and he went in and formed the National Society. Now, the full title of it, and I have to write this down because it's a bit of a tongue twister, is the National Society for Promoting the Education of the Poor in the Principles of the Established Church in England and Wales, shortened sometimes to the National Society for Promoting Religious Education. So you actually see a lot of those schools still out now because they're what we would call the VA schools, voluntary aided Church of England schools, would always be attached to a local church, whereas the Lancasterian schools were non-denominational. And I'll tell you this, that having looked at some of the registers from some of these schools, they do actually put what someone's religious denomination was. And it's fascinating. You had Quakers, you had Methodist, you had Catholic, you had Jewish, you had no religion. And that's in the early 1800s. So it's absolutely fascinating what he was doing. Now, this gives you another idea of what these classrooms actually used to look like. So you would have these 300 children. So you can see in this picture, I know it's sort of a sketch and it's a bit black and white, but you can see in it, up the far end, right at the far end, sitting under the clock, is the master, the teacher, the main teacher. And then you can see the children are all in rows. Now, they didn't choose which row to sit in. They would be put in that row according to which level they had achieved. And then on each row, there would be what's called pupil monitors. So that would be a pupil who already achieved that level, or could even have achieved far more than that, and was now responsible for making sure their row learned everything they needed to learn. These schools were set up all over the country. Unfortunately, a lot of them don't exist now, but they were all over the country. And the list I've seen, there was hundreds of these schools set up, all with the same format, this monitorial learning format devised by Lancaster. Another thing that is quite expensive, are books. Now, anyone who's got children who are studying or university or senior school will know books cost, or studying themselves, will know that books cost a lot of money. So what Lancaster came up with, he said, well, we only really need ostensibly 2 copies. We need that copy for the teacher to use at the front of the class. And then what they would do is all the other sheets would be blown up into large copies. And as you can see here, would be placed around the classroom so that when that row needed to go and work on them, they would go in their row with their pupil monitor and work on that page, saving an awful lot of money. And also this group learning, this encouraging each other to learn. It was very, very different. And you can see there, he's the bit up the top says the patron of education and the friend of the poor. He truly was. Oops, sorry. He truly was. I mentioned that there was loads of these schools about. Well, I've just pulled up 4 pictures for you of ones that are original buildings that were these British foreign schools or Lancasterian schools, whatever you want to call them. You may wonder as well what happened to Joseph Lancaster. Well, like I said, he was great at raising money, wasn't so good at looking after it, and he ran out quite a few times. He even ended up in what was a sponging house, which isn't a debtor's prison, but it's for someone who's has got no money. Now, in the picture here, the very, very tall building that says that's got the 2 red car and a silver car outside it, that's actually in Ross-on-Wye. It's actually a private residence now, I believe, so you can't actually visit it. And that one was built in 1837, which would have been actually, I think, after Lancaster. No, it was just before Lancaster died, actually, that one was set up. But that was, according to the registers, that the archives hold, and the archives are actually based in Brunel University, that had capacity to take up nearly 670 children. It would average at about 300 to 400 that it taught, but it had the capacity to take up to over 670. The picture right at the bottom is one of the schools in Birmingham, and you can see there, if you look closely, it does say British school. The one to the sort of the smaller one that looks like an aerial shot, that's actually in Shrewsbury, and that one could take again around 684 children. This would be boys and girls. The top one, that's actually where we're going to be talking about shortly, and that's the British school in Hitching that I am going to talk about in a minute. But what happened to Lancaster? Well, as I said, he died. He had been, well, the society had kind of been taken away from him in 1808, and someone else was running the books. And in 1814, they decided to rename it the British and Foreign School. Lancaster wasn't happy about this. You know, he was one of those people who, amazing teacher, amazing theories to do with education, but when it came to running a business, he was shocking. He couldn't do it. Also, when you read a lot of his work, his mind was quite erratic when it came to things, but he ended up going to America. He also got invited to set up some of these schools in South America and got taken for a bit of a ride there. He was married. He had a daughter. Unfortunately, his wife died. And then in 1838, he died. He was, I think it was the October of 1838, he was hit by a horse and carriage whilst in New York. And he didn't recover. And in fact, it's actually was documented in the British newspapers that this had happened. So it was a loss to education to lose him, because even though he was a rubbish businessman, he was an amazing educator. There's also a lot of stuff that gets talked about Lancaster, as in the kind of corporal punishments he used. One of the ones that he actually wanted corporal punishment not to punish, but to almost embarrass the child not to do it again. And one of his favourite ones, although we can't find definite proof of this, was to basically put a child in, I suppose you call it a Hessian type sack, you know, the sort of canvas sacks that they'd use, hoist them up in front of the class and make them sit in this sack to kind of embarrass them into behaving. But he was also into to being, he didn't encourage sort of rewarding a child just for doing good work, because he rewarded them for attendance, for effort, for things like that. Because, you know, he was really ahead of his time, knowing that some children just turning up for them was a big deal. You know, when you had a parent who the thought of that child not going to work and then going to school instead could be the difference between them having bread on the table that day. But they would turn up. So he would reward attendance. He would reward someone trying their very, very best to do good work, even if they weren't as clever as the person next to him, because they put the effort in. And I think this was insightful, and I think it was very, very ahead of his time. But what was to happen? Well, as education, it took a long way to get to where we are now. But there's lots of different education acts that if I was going to do a pure on history talk on education, I could talk about. But I've pulled out 4 that I think are quite important. So the 1870 is known as the Forster Act. What did this bring in? Well, this created school boards. So it created boards that would oversee the schools in their area. People weren't that happy about it because they definitely favoured the denominational schools. So those that were non-denominational, such as our Lancasterian schools, our British and foreign school, they might not get the funding, but it did it did sort of look at the whole education thing. And one of the things they did is they realised they had something in the region of 4.5 million children between the ages of 5 and 12, and only less than 50% of them were actually receiving an education, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. They also brought in with the 1870 Act that parents had a responsibility, if their children were under the age of 10 especially, to make sure they'd gone to school to learn the basics. And once they'd learned the basics, then they could go out and work. And they could actually be fined under the Act if the parent was seen not to be doing it, unless there was a reason. If the parent had been seen to be putting that kid in school as much as possible, but it was the kid that was bunking off, as long as the parent could prove that, they were okay. The next one, which kind of followed on from that, was the 1876, which is where they pushed even more that it was the parents' responsibility. In 1880, the Mandela Act looked into it even further. So there was mandatory attendance rules, which weren't set by the local government, but weren't set by, the board level, was set by local government and central government as well. And then in 1881, that's when education effectively became free for all, because up to that point, parents had to pay. Although from the 1870 Act, if a parent could prove that they couldn't pay, they could actually go to the poor board and ask for a subsidy so that their child could go to school. Now, these are all great, but what I do say to people is, well, if you go back to 1834 with the Poor Law Amendment Act, one of the things it said in that was children had to receive at least 3 hours of education every single day between the ages of 5 and 12. So when I say about people sort of berating me for talking about the workhouse had decided back in 1834 that children needed an education. So this is all sort of 35, 36 years a bit late, really. The Forster one, what I was saying about the legal obligation, it was that parents would pay. The legal obligation was that parents would pay should a child go. It was 1876 that the potential fines came in. Now, there was another act, but unless anyone wants to ask me about it, that was the Balfour Act in 1902, which actually abolished school boards and actually brought in local education authorities. But I'm not going to cover that one right now. I'm going to talk about this place. Now, this place is the British Schools Museum in Hitching. The road it's on is called Queen Street. It's an amazing building, and this photo doesn't do justice for quite how big it is. So what you can see at the front here, you can see the doorway. You can see the doorway to the school where there's like a sandwich board outside. You can see the gatepost next to it, which would have been the entrance to the playground, which they still own. You can see those 2 houses. That would have been the master and the mistress's houses. And then right out the back, which you can't really see in this photo because I'd need an aerial shot to show you, you've got a massive, massive hall, which was the Lancasterian classroom. You've also got what they call the Edwardian classroom. You've got the galleried classroom. It's huge. It's an amazing place. And this is what my new book is about. I first visited here back in September 2019, and the place, I can only say this without sounding sort of sycophantic, but the place shouts at you. It kind of lulls you in. Now, here's an example. This is the only Lancasterian classroom left in the UK. And if you remember what I showed you in those black and white drawings, I don't know if you can see, but in the corner, you can see a semicircle drawn on the floor. Now, this was where there would have been the pages hung up on the wall. The children would have stood around that semicircle. You can see the rows, and you see a Roman numeral for 1 there. That would have been where, well, I think it's normally the first level children would have sat, and so on and so forth. You've got the master's desk at the front, and there would have been up to 300 children in this room. Again, I can't imagine it, but you go there and it gives you a really good idea of how it would have been laid out. Now, as I say, I have just I've written a book about this, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And the reason I pulled this photo up is this is a gentleman by the name of William Fitch, and Fitch was the most, they call him the most successful master that Hitching had ever had. He was there for years. And the reason I pull this photo up is to start talking a bit of ghosts and paranormal. Now, Fitch lived in the master's house, which when you look at the two houses would have been the one on the right. In fact, he's standing outside his house in this photo. And if you look closely at it, you can kind of make out the shape. But if you look by where his arm is bent, you can kind of make out the shape of a child. And this photo was taken, well, a good 100-odd years ago. In fact, more than that, probably 120 years ago. And it's one that, whilst there have been logical explanations as to where this came from, one of the trustees at the school who gave me lots of valuable information, Terry, he said that his theory is that because you had to stand so long for these photos to be taken, Fitch was standing there in his pose and a child ran past him. And that's where you get the shadow of a child, because he didn't catch it on film because of how long the exposure took. I don't know. And I also joke that it's a bit like looking at a sonogram when someone's pregnant. You have to, once you see the figure, you can't not see it, but it takes you a while of staring at it and someone pointing out, it's there, can't you see it? But this is a really sort of infamous photo, and actually Fitch is one of the more infamous hauntings that is meant to take place at the British School. Now, this is a mock-up of inside the master's house. I'll be honest, and you will read this in my book, I don't like the master's house. I don't feel welcome there. I feel like I'm intruding, no matter how polite I am, no matter I shut the doors. And if you read the book, you'll get what I'm alluding to there. I clean my feet, I say please and thank you. I just don't feel welcome there. It makes me feel, not that I'm going to be hurt, but that just I'm intruding. But there are so many artifacts in there, especially you see the front room there. A lot of that stuff is stuff that the museum has collected over the years to mock it up to look like it would have been an Edwardian type, Victorian, type front room. I was trying to think when he died, and he would have been Victorian. Victorian type front room that we don't know, obviously, what things these genuine artifacts have actually brought in. The other picture is of the staircase, and you might think, oh, she put a staircase on there. It's pretty dull. I've seen a staircase. I cannot go up these stairs without feeling like I'm about to pass out. It's so, and I'm not the only person who's mentioned it. They make me go really dizzy. Almost feels, and when you go up to the first floor of the house where there's 3 bedrooms, I'll stand there and it feels like I'm on a ship and I'm moving, and I'm not the first person to have reported that. Those stairs, I cling to the banister because I do feel like I'm going to get pushed. Now, I can't find any reports of anyone having hurt themselves falling down the stairs. And even though Fitch wasn't the only master at the school, he's the only master to have ever lived in that house, because they were built in 1857. There'd been a big fire at the school sort of 12 years previously. and there's one of the school big buildings that had to be reconstructed. The school was originally opened in 1811, but it had gone through quite a lot of changes. But these stairs, I always feel like I'm about to get shoved down them, and it's a very sort of disconcerting feeling. In fact, I'd never told my family this, and I took them to the museum because it is a brilliant museum. You must go and visit. It's absolutely fascinating. For children as well, because they can have a go at having, in effect, a Victorian lesson, and they can do some things that are sort of applicable to the different time periods that the school went through. My eldest son, who would have been 11, he was coming down the stairs. Now, he's a typical boy. He's confident. He runs up and down stairs, doesn't think twice about it. He's coming down them, and all of a sudden he was like, whoa, I feel really dizzy. Now, I'd never told him about that, but he picked up on it as well, which is... I think is quite interesting, if I'm honest. Now, the last story, again, you're looking at a window going, why is she putting a window up? Everyone's seen a window. Well, this is the window into what would have been the mistress's house. Now, I'm going to tell you something that's in a story that's in the book that I experienced. You can believe me if you want to. I don't mind, but it's true. And when this happened to me, I did not know this had been the mistress's house. I didn't even know this was part of the school. So my first investigation there back in September 2019 was with the lovely ladies from the Paranormal Sisters. Now, I'd had to park slightly further up from the school, so I'd gone in on my own, and I didn't know where they were because I didn't know where I was going. And I'm walking up to where this is. Now, if you remember that front picture I showed you the school building on kind of, as you looked at it, the left of the gates, and the houses on the right. Well, this window didn't have the blind down. And I saw someone through the window with what it looked like a hair on top of her head in a bun, bending over. So I thought, oh, there must be someone in there. I'll knock on the door and see if they know where I'm supposed to go. Well, the door opened as I knocked on it. So, okay, fine, it's open. And I thought, well, the window's on my left, as the door is sort of, I suppose you could say, to the right of that photo. And the other door opened. Oh, okay, there's no one there. But there was someone's like fleece on the back of a chair. I was like, oops, I'll come into someone's office. I better leave. So I walked out and shut the doors and went and ended up finding where the ladies were. Now, I was chatting to the then manager of the school, and I was telling him what had happened. And he went really pale, and he said, that was my office. And he said, it wasn't unlocked. I locked those doors before I left. And I promise you, they were unlocked. And he went, they can't have been. I locked them before I left. And we went back there, and nobody had been there whilst we were between this happening. And yeah, the doors were locked. I don't know what I saw, and I don't know why those doors were open, but they were definitely locked when I went back. And nobody had been to it between me being able to get in and having seen a woman with her hair up in a bun. And it was then that I was told, well, you do know that was the mistress's house. One of those shivers up your back, shivers up your spine moments. It's honestly, and that's just a couple of the stories of things that I have personally experienced there. There's loads of other accounts that I've collected and put into the book, and some of them from actual staff themselves. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the school itself, there's 2 books out that I would recommend. Both of them are produced by the museum themselves. And I also like to stress the museum is actually a voluntary run museum. And so any sort of visits they get, it's not a big sort of business that's run by, National Trust or English Heritage. But I would recommend, if this is something you think you'd be interested in finding more about, grab hold of these 2 books. They are very, very interesting. And I know from talking to them, they are actually thinking of producing a version, a follow-up, if you like, to Educating Our Own, that's actually based on the mistresses of Hitching girls' British school, of which there's some interesting stories themselves. But what about my book? Here you go. This is it. It's called Paranormal Playtime, the school that never sleeps. I was lucky enough to have a foreword by Barry Guy. He wrote it for me because he's been there quite a few times. There are loads of people who've contributed to their sort of experiences of the book, including members of staff, like I say, from the school. It is available now on Amazon if you want to download it, although I will caveat that with I haven't had my editorial copy through yet, so I haven't double checked it. So if you want to wait, I won't hold it against you. But yes, it's got a bit of history. It talks about Hitching, the area, because one of the things I found when I was looking into this is most people found it very hard who've been to Hitching to know that it was incredibly poor. And it was incredibly poor at one time. So there was actually lots of different, there was a national school there. There was even, I believe, a ragged school there. So there was definitely people who needed this help, who needed this education. Well, there you go. If you want to go to the British Schools Museum, that's the website address. If you're actually interested in learning more about ragged schools, which is another type, I can recommend the Ragged School Museum in East London. It's superb. I've investigated there. It's a brilliant place. It's fascinating. And interestingly, the British and Foreign School Society, even though they stopped operating schools in the early 20th century, they do still exist. And they do a lot of work with educating the poor around the world now. So I would say Lancaster's original vision, which he came up with in 1798, is still going strong in 2021. Well, there you go. I'm going to try and get back to my... There we go. I'm back. Okay, so has anyone got any questions? Oh, Karen, you've changed. I can't hear you, Joe. You're muted.
I thought I might mute. I thought I might just morph myself into Joe for a second. That was so informative. I've never been to the Hitching School, so you talking about it is just phenomenal. And some of the comments that were coming through as well are just literally blown my mind, because lots of people have had the same experiences that you've had.
Really?
Yeah, so one gentleman said that he feels that there was a spirit on the stairs, and he said he does like to push them, but he also stands there wagging his finger at people.
Okay, I'm just going to the comments now. Yeah, Paracom are actually featured. They're actually one of the people who contributed to the book. A couple of people have mentioned Paracom, yes. And I know that Pete was hoping that if we get, I think he's supposed to be investigating there again in a few months, and we were hoping if it gets opened up, he's invited me along as a special guest. I'm just seeing if there's any, if there's any questions at all, please do put them down now, because we've got another, I think, 17 minutes. To talk about, and honestly, the school, it's a weird thing. I mean, I've given you a whistle-stop tour of the history and everything else. There is an awful lot more in the book, especially more personal accounts and all of that kind of thing. But it's this weird place that once you've been, you call it yours. You kind of, I don't have not been. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I kind of. Yeah, I can't explain it, but I did get told when I'm very good friends with a lot of the trustees there now, obviously. And when I spoke to the head trustee, a lady by the name of Denise, she said one of the things she was told when she first started volunteering there by one of the women who went there when it was a school was be really, really careful, because this place gets under your skin. And it does. You can't want to leave. It's a very, very it's an amazing place. One of the reasons that I've written the book is to encourage people to go, whether it be as the museum, whether it be as paranormal, because they do allow paranormal groups in, and I don't think it's mega expensive. Obviously at the moment they're restricted a bit on numbers because of COVID. Well, they're closed at the moment, but they're restricted a bit on numbers. But it's huge. It's very deceptive from the street, quite how big it is. I mean, I didn't even talk about the galleried classroom, which is my favorite bit of it. Honestly, and the reason they asked me to do this book is to promote it in a different way. So to those people, a bit like with everything I do, those people are like, history, it's dull, might sort of oh, Stu, do we know what was on the site? Yes, it was a malt house. In fact, I didn't mention this. It's in the book again because I can't talk up the like 30,000 words. So I can't cover that all in a presentation. When William Wilshire decided to set this school up, because he had actually seen Lancaster speak and was very impressed with him. And one of Wilshire did a lot of work for the Whitbread family, famous brewers, and that him and one of the Whitbreads decided it would be a good idea. So Wilshire donated the malt house.
Wow.
To become a school. And that's on the site of where the building is. I couldn't really show you, but the site where what they call the girls and the infants building was the original malt house. And if you go into what I call it the boiler room, but it was the cellar that they use as an air raid shelter. They've got the original 1700s floor from when it was a malt house. So that's what was on the site, a malt house.
That's amazing. Rachel wants to know, have you got any audio books out?
No, but I have a podcast.
You have the Haunted Histories podcast, don't you?
The award-winning Haunted History.
Award-winning as well. I was just about to say that.
Yes, no, I don't actually. You're not the first person to say that. There is. I have started looking into it, but I'm better at writing than speaking the books. But yes, my goal actually last year before the first lockdown was to get more videos up on my YouTube channel, like more talks and things. And obviously that all kind of went to pot because you can't visit anywhere. But no, I haven't. But thank you very much. But yes, the new podcast out every fortnight. In fact, I've got Jane and Dale from Are You Haunted on the one that I released. If you don't already follow my Haunted Histories page, if you go and follow that, I advertise them on there every fortnight.
There's some great ones though, isn't there? You've done some amazing podcasts on history just in general, but you're coming to Bosworth 2021, aren't you?
Am I?
You are.
I know.
I'm excited.
What? You're coming? What? Yeah.
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm so looking forward to having you there, and well, yeah, it's just going to be an amazing weekend. So I hope you've got your history hat on for Bosworth anyway.
Don't I always? Tasha Brown has just put, you get a lot of children's voices in there. Yes, you do. Like I say, just get a copy of the book. You can get it on Kindle. You don't have to get the hard copy. You can get the Kindle one. That's some of the experiences I've had with children. I think everyone's had children's voices that we can't explain, that there's no reason. It's not like children should be up and giggling at midnight. But Sarah Smith, have you had any other experiences in the schools? Well, I've done the Ragged School. I had quite a few there. I wrote about that actually in my first book, my Haunted History. I wrote about the Ragged School in London. I mean, schools. I've had experiences in my kids' primary school, for heaven's sake. In fact, I was talked to one of the teachers once. I said, "Did you know this school's got something in it?" She went, "Oh yes, things go missing quite a lot, and doors opening and shutting by themselves, and all that kind of thing." Because the kids' school's nearly 100 years old. No, 200. Yeah, 100 years old. I was trying to think when it was built. So yeah, it's
Schools tend to be haunted though if they've been in the village for quite a number of years, though, don't they? I know mine's haunted.
I think it's just that the kids have such that pure energy that just. I mean, I tend to find with a lot of them that it's not always it's not responsive energy or whatever. It's more residual. But I just think it's because those kids' energy, it's so pure, it's so innocent, it's so vibrant, seeps in, and I don't know. But yeah, I must admit that I think Barry said something about the spirit on the stairs being negative. It doesn't feel negative, it just feels annoyed. It doesn't feel like, I don't feel at risk, I just feel like I'm intruding. And, you know, like if I walked into your house, Joe, uninvited, and just sat there and went, okay. I know you'd make me one because you're lovely, but I'd still feel like I was intruding. Yeah. So, yeah, none of the school feels intimidating. It does feel more like you've walked into someone's classroom and you shouldn't really be in there. It doesn't feel like I'm about to get chased out or hurt, or it's just an amazing place. It really is. I can't sort of.
It's nice when you have that affinity to a building, though, isn't it? If you've been there a number of times, you kind of go back and you kind of peel that layer of an onion off, don't you? Yeah. Every single time that you go, and it's you find something new every single time you visit a venue, and especially if you feel attached to it in a positive way, I think you tend to get more activity anyway.
Hopefully. I mean, I've put all this in the book, but because I couldn't do the big investigations that I'd originally planned, there I had to go off and do a few sort of solo couple of hours, just sitting in a room. My husband had took the kids off to amuse them. Another time I'd been working in the area, so I went in after work when they'd shut the museum for the public. And yeah, although it wasn't like Ghost Central, you know what I mean, I still had stuff happen I can't explain, like genuinely can't explain. So I think it is one of those places that it definitely, yeah, I mean, I can't it just, but it's not scary. It's not a scary place. It's not, you know, some places you go into and you just think, oh, the minute you walk in, like, I've got to have my guard up here. It's a bit like when you're walking down the street at night and you see some lads walking towards you, you know, you've got to have your guard up. It's not like that, but it's one that you walk in and you just go, okay, I need to have my manners today. I need to be polite. I need to be respectful. I need to no swearing. They don't swear. Really don't. So it's I really can't recommend it enough. And like I say, it's a volunteer run place, and it is the last one in the UK that you can go and see. So it really is worth making the trip to Hitching.
Yeah. It sounds good. It sounds like an amazing place to visit, and it's probably one that's on my to-do list as well. It is. But we can't go out anywhere, can we, at the minute? So it's all
see, that's the other problem for the museum, that their income has been cut completely, and they rely on people coming through the door to keep the place running. In fact, this year it's their 25th anniversary of being a museum, because there was a lady, and her name just completely escaped me, and if anyone from the museum is watching this, I'm so sorry, but the lady who rescued it was going to be pulled down, and wow. She, no, you can't, this is too important, and she rescued Jill something, and she rescued it. And yes, it's their 25th anniversary of being a museum, which is why we've coordinated releasing the book now. I'm hoping to be able to get there and either do some virtual presentation talks for them, or some proper kind of later in the year meet and greets. And you know, who knows what else we'll organise to promote it. But it is a friend to the paranormal, that place, if you get what I mean. They really do welcome good, courteous paranormal groups going in there, seeing what they can find. And who knows, there may even be a follow-up book in a couple of years, because having written this one, the chap I told you, Terry, who mentioned the photo theory, he's given me some other bits of the school that I'd never seen, and he's like, right, you know, that they're now, go and find them. So and these are ones that public aren't allowed to see, so you never know what I might find out.
Well, fingers crossed that you can get out very soon. So it'll be a nice time to get out. You know, once we've come out of lockdown and everything, it'd be a great place to go back. But whereabouts can people buy your book, Penny?
Amazon, or if they want a signed copy, I'm only sending them in the UK at the moment. But if they want a signed copy, message me directly. And we can organise that. Like I say, it's only just gone live, so I haven't got any hard copies yet, and I haven't actually checked the hard copy because I haven't had my copy through. So I'm trying to stop people buying it that just yet on hard copy if they can. But yes, it's on Amazon. When I know for sure I'm happy with it, the hard copy, I mean, and the cover that I showed in the talk, that was done by the wonderful Mr. Andy Saw, who does all covers, and anyone who knows me might recognize my two little models on the front.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the boys. It's my boys standing in front of the school. Yes, I cajoled them into doing it. But yes, Amazon or me direct if you want a signed copy, and then I can let you know when it's going to be out. There was a post up there saying, do you get a 2-for-1 or something? They're cheap. It's $7.99. The book's $7.99. It's not expensive, and I think I put it up for $2.99. So it's not expensive as far as go. And I will be donating a percentage of the profits back to the school to help try and help my bit to help as well.
That's fantastic. But thank you so much, Penny, for joining us this evening. We've got the lovely Craig Morris, Psychic Medium, coming up at 9 o'clock. But just to give you a bit of an update so far on the total funds that we've raised £802 so far. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who keep donating, and it just goes to a fantastic charity. So thank you so much, Penny. And I'm going to play just the video now, just obviously just to keep the awareness going and making sure that everybody understands what we're trying to achieve this weekend. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
So together we can make a difference. So thank you all for your donations so far. Stay tuned. We've got Craig Morris, a psychic medium, talking to Karen coming up, and we've got all through the night, we've got different people. So please, if you can, give what you can. And if not, have a great evening, and I'll be sure to see you very soon.